You're standing in an elevator. 10 seconds of silence. Nothing to look at, nothing to do. Your hand is already in your pocket. You didn't decide to reach for your phone. It just happened. Like a reflex older than the buttons you're pressing. You'd probably call it boredom. Maybe a habit. Something notifications trained into you over the years. A little itch for a hit of something. But the real answer is far stranger. What's happening in that elevator has almost nothing to do with your phone. It has everything to do with what your brain does the second nothing is demanding its attention. And the truth is, it doesn't shut off. It switches into a different gear entirely. One that's been running since long before screens existed, so why can't you just sit there? Why does 10 seconds of nothing feel unbearable? For a long time, neuroscientists assumed the resting brain was just idling, coasting, burning a little fuel until the next task showed up. Then, in the early 2000s, a neurologist named Marcus Rachel noticed something strange in brain scans. When people stopped doing a task, when they were told to lie still and think about nothing in particular, certain regions of the brain didn't go quiet. They lit up, a coordinated network switching on the instant the outside world stopped giving it instructions. He called it the default mode network. It turns out doing nothing is not nothing. It's a specific energy-hungry mode your brain enters by default, the moment external demands disappear. And what does it do in that mode? It turns inward. It replays old conversations. It rehearses arguments you haven't had yet. It scans for problems that don't exist yet. It drafts apologies nobody asked for. Silence doesn't empty your mind. It fills it with you. For most people, that's exactly where the trouble starts. In 2014, a psychologist named Timothy Wilson ran an experiment that sounds almost too simple to matter. He asked people to sit alone in a bare room for 6 to 15 minutes. No phone, no book, nothing to do but think. Most of them hated it. Not mildly, genuinely hated it. So Wilson pushed further. Before the sitting began, he gave participants a small electric shock. Unpleasant enough that most said they'd pay money never to feel it again. Then he left them alone in that same bare room, with a button they could press to shock themselves a second time if they wanted to. A quarter of them pressed it. Given a choice between sitting with their own thoughts or causing themselves physical pain, a meaningful number of people chose the pain. Think about what that means. Your brain isn't just reluctant to be idle. For some people, in some moments, it would rather hurt than be left alone with itself. Why would evolution build a mind this uncomfortable in its own company? Here's the twist almost nobody expects. This isn't a malfunction. It isn't your phone's fault, and it isn't some uniquely modern disorder of attention. Wilson ran versions of the study across age groups, education levels, and income brackets, including people who barely use smartphones at all. The discomfort showed up everywhere, in almost identical proportions. That's the part that should stop you. This isn't a side effect of notifications. It's older than notifications. It's older than written language. For nearly all of human history, an idle mind in an idle body was not a luxury. It was a vulnerability. A mind that stopped scanning, stopped simulating threats, stopped rehearsing its standing within the group. That mind missed the rustle in the grass, missed the shift in someone's tone that meant alliances were quietly changing. Idle attention got people killed, or at the very least, got them slowly pushed out of the group that kept them fed and protected. So the brain never learned how to do nothing safely. It learned to fill every empty second with simulation, because for nearly the entire span of your species' existence, simulation was survival. Worrying about tomorrow was rehearsal for tomorrow. Replaying yesterday's conversation was practice for the next one. The restlessness you feel in silence isn't broken machinery. It's a threat detection system still running exactly the program it was built to run, just with nothing real left to detect. Which means this was never really about willpower. You're not weak for reaching for your phone in that elevator. You're running ancient software in a room with no predators in it. A few years before Wilson's experiment, two researchers at Harvard, Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert, tested something closely related. They built a simple app that pinged thousands of people at random points throughout their day and asked two things. What are you doing right now? And is your mind on that task or wandering somewhere else? The results, published in the journal Science, were almost uncomfortable to read. People's minds wandered nearly half the time across almost every activity measured, with one notable exception. And the more a person's mind wandered, regardless of what it wandered toward, the less happy they reported feeling in that exact moment. A wandering mind, in other words, isn't relaxing. It isn't even neutral. It's often quietly, persistently unpleasant, even when the wandering drifts somewhere pleasant. Because the default mode network was never built for leisure. It was built for vigilance, for rehearsal, for keeping track of exactly where you stand. Asking it to simply enjoy stillness is a little like asking a smoke detector to enjoy the smell of smoke. So when your hand drifts toward your phone in that elevator, you're not weak-willed, and you're not addicted in the simple way people usually mean it. You're outsourcing a job your brain used to do alone, in silence, scanning for danger and rehearsing your next move within the group. Except now there's a device that will happily do the scanning for you. It will show you who said what. It will hand you the next thing to worry about. It will simulate the social world on your behalf, faster and louder than your own mind ever could on its own. Your phone didn't create the restlessness. It found a hole that was already there, shaped exactly like itself, carved out over a few 100,000 years by a mind that was never once allowed to fully switch off. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If the discomfort is this ancient, was it always this loud? Or did something else change? Here's where it gets stranger still. For most of human history, true silence, the kind you're standing in right now, alone, with no task and no company, barely existed. People lived in small, dense, noisy groups. There was almost always sound nearby. A conversation a few feet away. A child crying. An animal shifting in the dark. A fire crackling through the night. Solitude wasn't the default human condition. It was rare enough that in many traditional societies, deliberately seeking it out was treated as something closer to a spiritual discipline, a practice monks and mystics trained for over years, not something an ordinary person stumbled into between meetings on a Tuesday. You can see the same impulse show up in smaller, quieter ways all over modern life, long before anyone reaches for a phone. The television left on in an empty room for company, music playing while you cook, even when you're not really listening. The radio in a car on an empty highway where there's no one to talk to and nothing forcing you to listen. None of that is really about entertainment. It's the same ancient system, reaching for any signal at all rather than sitting with none. Modern life is the first period in history where ordinary people end up alone, quiet, and undemanded for hours at a stretch, almost every single day. Waiting for elevators, sitting in cars at red lights, standing in lines, lying awake at 2 in the morning with nothing left to do but think. You didn't get worse at handling silence. You just started encountering far more of it than your mind was ever built to manage. So the next time you feel that itch in the quiet, the hand drifting toward the phone, the sudden urgent need to check something, anything, you can name what's actually happening underneath it. It isn't boredom. It isn't weakness. It's a few 100,000 years of vigilance with nowhere left to point itself, lighting up the instant nothing else claims it. You're standing in an elevator. 10 seconds of silence. Nothing to look at, nothing to do. This time, you don't reach for your phone. You just notice the part of you that wants to. And you realize it was never really about the phone at all. It was always about what happens the moment the world stops talking and you're finally left alone with the oldest voice you have.